I think music for you was a kind of life raft as well. You didn't have a greatly happy childhood. Your mother had died when you were, again, 5 or 6 years old. You had quite tough time with your dad. You weren't happy at school. Tell me a bit about that early life.
Well, there was no money. Mum died when I was 6 or 7. My dad's job was a commercial traveller. So he would go away on Monday and come back on Friday, and he sold things like towels and bits of glassware. And you can imagine in rural Ireland in the 50s and early 60s, not much going on. So my 2 elder sisters and myself, I was the youngest, were sort of left to our own devices. My dad was spending whatever money he had trying to get us a decent education. But I think what happened, I think my father has said, he's dead now, but he said that after my mother died, I think I surfed it for a while. I was okay in school, and then when reason began to intrude, unfortunately, on the developing mind, I just opted out and didn't bother. And that began a source of great friction between the two of us, especially as he was away all week. And he'd come home to, in effect, a house, but it was my home because I lived there all the time. But I was 13, 14, 15, and he could fuck off. You know, I mean, it's as simple as that. The only thing that gave me any sort of a glimmer of possibility was a golden thread that seemed to be lowered out of the purple ether of the radio called rock and roll, where young boys and girls, not much older than me, sang of other universes, of other possibilities. It wasn't this and it could be that. And Sputnik spoke to that, and so did John and Paul, and Mick and Keith, and Pete and Bob. And I feverishly clung on to that, and largely still do.
Now, let me just, in a nutshell, say that you were hopeless at school, weren't you? Yeah. You were hopeless at sport.
Yeah.
Yeah. You referred to your time that it was an unwelcoming, cold, and fairly bleak world. So I found something in rock and roll that I grabbed onto for dear life.
Yeah, I mean, because I was crap at school, obviously I left with no qualifications whatsoever, and an attitude and resentment, and the economy hadn't improved really in Ireland. Ireland was sort of stuck in this aspect of some imaginary Celtic, utopia or something. And I wasn't, and nor was many of my generation having much of that, but there was no opportunities. I'd gone around a few places in the world. I just left and tried to get as many jobs as I could. I worked on the motorways, driving heavy machinery. Everything was just, I'll work to this amount, I'll save, I won't spend a penny, move on. There'll be something somewhere that fits. What I was doing was, I was going to the Arctic Circle to dig for gold. The money was ridiculous. I mean, really a lot of money, because there was nothing to do in the Arctic. And so I took a Greyhound across Canada, and I was assembling my illegal immigration papers, which weren't difficult, but I needed a month to get these various plastic cards with my name on it and stuff like that. Anyway, I got bored hanging around for a month and went down to the hippie part of town, Gastown, and I got a job on an underground paper. I lied, I said I was a visiting journalist. Obviously I was on holiday, so I didn't have any work with me, but why didn't they send me out to review some local bands? If they didn't like it, they didn't have to print it. So they bought this cockamamie story, and I was a music editor then in 3 months. I persuaded them to give half the paper to music. Yeah, I loved that job, and I would have been very happy living in Vancouver and doing that, but the Mounties got their man. They sent me back to Ireland. I was bored, and one day I went to the pub and there were two guys I knew and they were talking of starting a band. Because of the upbringing you described, I gravitated towards books like by Dickens or John Steinbeck or Studs Terkel or more immediately Woody Guthrie's Bound for Glory. These really did impact me. So, and I was always interested in politics. So at 13 in this school, me and my mate Mick Foley started anti-apartheid and organised a march. At 15 and 16, I just didn't go home anymore. I'd go into Dublin and work with the homeless and the hookers and the men. There was no divorce in Ireland, so they'd just leave the home, lose their jobs, be dirty, start drinking, and that was it. And this group I worked with, we'd get groceries from the shops as they closed at night, the ones they hadn't sold. The bakers would give us their first round. We'd light a big campfire, if you like, in Smithfield Market in Dublin and make soup. And these people would gather about. And this was much more interesting to me. These people were much more interesting to me than anything in school. But here were the characters from Steinbeck and Terkel and Dickens, but in my town, in my time. And it was entirely unacceptable. And so that was where I was at. And then when the band starts, I'm writing about those things. Mm-hmm. So this is a consistent thread. It doesn't come out of nothing. But by 1984, the Rats had sold a lot of records, gold records, platinum records, you know, stadiums, Screech and Scream. And suddenly we were on the dip, and that was because there was a new generation of people with something else to talk about. You can't understand Live Aid by removing it. You can't understand rock and roll without putting it in its time and its context and the economy. And you need to understand Live Aid in the context of the 1980s. So 1983, greed is good. You know, 18-year-olds with, you know, red braces and Porsches and the city, fine. But then for the Prime Minister to argue that there's no such thing as society, which is a misquote, it's not that fair because she qualified it, but nonetheless, that's what sticks. There's no such. So it was a time of a lack of kindness, a lack of generosity. And we were old by this stage, and we were not considered cool anymore. And so I kind of thought, well, I'm 30 or whatever it was. You know, is that it? Is that the best part of my life over? And I was with my partner, my girlfriend, and we'd been together for, 8 years or something. Yeah, something like that. And we just had a little baby, a little girl. But the most telling thing is I was at home for the 6 o'clock news. Now, if you're in pop, you're not at home at 6 o'clock. You really aren't. It's just non-stop. It's exhausting. It's a young man and young woman's form. It's non-stop. You're going, you better go for it or goodbye. So it's 24 hours. You're traveling, you're touring, you're playing, you're rehearsing, you're doing interviews, you're in Germany, you're in America, you're in Korea doing television. And it's exhausting. But that wasn't happening to me. I was at home at 6. And I turn on the thing, and my little baby is beside me, and my missus is at the other end of the sofa. And the BBC give this report of a famine, I think 10 minutes at the top of the 6 o'clock news. Now, again, please, everyone remember, this is a binary media world. There's no streaming platforms. There's nothing else. So everyone sees this stuff, everyone. Just like Top of the Pops was really powerful because everyone watched it. And in the schoolyard the next day, did you see that, what was that weird Bowie guy wearing? He was fucking great, he was, No, he wasn't. So that was it. Everyone sees this thing, but that's not in my head. I see it. And I'm transfixed with the horror and the words that perfectly articulate that despair. And my missus, I turned to her and she's crying, not sobbing, but just a tear. And this, I think, is because we have our first baby, our cute little thing. And here are these cute little things. And these aren't odd figures out of the Bible in togas. These are mothers and fathers. More actually, cozily, these are mums and dads. And they're clutching these bags of their children and giving them whatever in order to help them live.